All right, everyone, here we are. It's showtime. Got my cup of tea. And most importantly, I've got my great mate sitting back here with me. There he is. Kevin, he's given himself a name this week. What's that all about? The Ledge.
It's the Ledge is started as a bit of a joke when we were in actually it comes in two parts. One is when our son Shane was a bit younger, we were at a show and there was, he does now, but going back 3 or 4 years, he still didn't completely understand what I actually did for a living. In fact, he was sort of like didn't really think I had a job because other folks' parents would leave the house and go to work and come back and all that stuff, and I would just be here in my boxer shorts or sweats drawing. And he even said at one point, he goes, why don't you have a real job like Uncle Chad or somebody? He works in a steakhouse or he said, and so we were at the show and there was like 200 or 300 people lined up to see me, and he was sort of like was looking down the line of people. He goes, what do they want? And I go, well, they're big fans of the Turtles, and I'm one of the co-creators that made the Turtles, and I wrote the stories, and so they want to ask me to sign autographs and they tell me stories about when they were a kid and what they love about the Turtles. And like the first couple of people came up and said, oh my God, you're like a living legend. And so Shane looked at me and goes, so you're like famous or something? You're like a living legend? and so that was kind of part of it. So yeah, so I just said, they, joking with your son, I go, yeah, they call me the Ledge, and like Bono and the Edge. And then when it came back sort of full circle when we were in Australia earlier this year, because their sort of description of something awesome or big or mega or massive or huge is legend. Like you're legend, and so it came back, and so in Australia I revisited the idea of calling myself the Ledge.
Nice, I like it. So you're now Kevin the Ledge Eastman. Very nice.
And the silliest.
We want to say hi to everybody that started to come on in. So we will say hi to Toka, and let's see, we've got Tetsu, we've got Jasneet, who was always with us, Mahir, Shaman, let's see, Word Balloon over there, and Orville Nation. How you doing, PJ? We know some of these people very well now. We've been hanging out with these folks, and yeah, if you guys want to hit the like button, apparently that's what we tell you to do. And more importantly, share the stream, get people in, because tonight, Kevin and I are going to do something that we really have not done before. It's nice to talk about things that are in the past. But while Kevin and I have shared an incredible experience with a publishing endeavor called Tundra Publishing, and while we talked about it last week, there's a bunch that we didn't cover, and we're going to cover it tonight. So it's probably about to get interesting. What we'll do is
we're just going to make up stories to make it super interesting.
Yeah, we're just going to make it up. But there has been so many times that I've been asked by reporters to give this story, and I will tell you why I haven't done it. I gave a beginning of this story one time to a comic book reporter, and I told them that I wasn't prepared to tell the story of Tundra Publishing behind the scenes unless they checked my sources. So in other words, I'm not prepared to let you write an opinion piece. I'm going to tell you the truth of what happened at Tundra Publishing, and you're going to check any sources that I give you. And that reporter unfortunately published without checking the sources. And I was very unhappy about it, because the problem that I find with that, Kev, is that it seemed like it was just my opinion. Well, it wasn't my opinion. It was the truth of what happened. And so I've always been very, very reluctant to talk about Tundra, because I would love to be able to tell the truth with you about some of the interesting things that happened back there. But I'm not going to do it just as an opinion piece, right? We're going to tell the truth. Who's here? Who's visiting you? Is it the boss?
Watching my cat.
Oh, the cat. Yeah.
Yeah, you have a lot of cats. So there's like, we have two in here, and she's not usually in here. And this is the girl cat, but it's like our son is out with a friend on his birthday tonight. Today they were doing a little thing over at their place, and so the girl cat, which is has officially adopted Shane as her son, is sort of extremely lonely. Like, where's my? Because especially we've been quarantining for so long, so now our animals are even more spoiled because they see us around 24/7. So
yeah, no, I got the same thing. This is Claudius, and he comes with me on most of my streams.
No, I know. It's funny. It's like you made me think of it's a funny sort of anecdote, and it's sort of back in the early days of Mirage when I sort of started figuring out sort of what kind of press was real press or interview was a real interview, or what was just fluff or silly or just was kind of nutty, was that we did this when the turtles really started taking off. We did this interview with People magazine, and I kid you not, it was just crazy because they came up. There was a photographer that came up and literally spent the entire day, photographing me and Pete at the studio, us in our individual homes and our favorite spots, and a location sort of outside the studio, walking around Northampton or things like that. Us with, I think Steve Levine wore one of the turtle costumes, and we did a couple poses with Steve in this alley in Northampton, which is one of those cleanest cities in the world. And then we spent 2 full days with the reporter, who just asked every question, note after note, and stacks and stacks of legal pads full of notes. And so when the article finally comes out in People magazine, because we're pretty kind of excited to see, this was a big deal back then. This was really when things first started taking off, and it was part of one page. It led into a 2-page spread, and that was pretty much it. The main pictures on the page were of the 4 turtles. It was this tiny picture, maybe 1 inch by 2 inch, of Peter and I in this alley that you could sort of barely make out who we were. And the text was probably maybe 3 paragraphs long, 4 paragraphs long, and 80% of the text, to be fair to the writer, was wrong.
Yeah.
It was had nothing to do with anything we talked about, anything. And we just went we just related to the fact that if they could mess up something as sort of simple as a sort of a fluff piece, like the coming of the Ninja Turtles and stuff like that, how much other stuff in this magazine, People magazine, is wrong, or in other magazines is wrong. So it is sort of
my very first interview was with my band, and I said a bunch of stuff, and they asked us about the music, and I said a few things, and then I read the interview, and I said, I don't know who said those things, but none of the things that I said about our music were the things that were actually written into the article. And honestly, it went downhill from there. I've had articles where I've literally written answers, because nowadays we get them in an email and we write the answers. So I'm not quite sure how you could mess that up, and it still doesn't end up coming out. So that's always been the challenge, right? In telling the true story, is that we know, because we were there, and we're telling the truth about what happened. But nowadays it almost seems as though if there are 2 arguments to be made, if someone basically decides to lie and someone decides to tell the truth, the liar says, well, there are 2 sides to every story. And I say this every time: there are not 2 sides to every story. There's no 2 sides to a drive-by shooting, right? How could there be? It's not that I shot a bullet and that person got their head in the way. That's a lie, right? You killed a person, someone died. There's not 2 sides to that story. And sometimes there are not 2 sides to this Tundra Publishing story. And I think that's what's been frustrating over the years. Hello, Elihu. How are you? All right. We're glad to have you in. If you guys are watching, please hit the like button, apparently, so that lots of stuff happens and more people come in. All right, Kev. So before we get into this, I know you've actually been pretty busy lately. You showed this thing on Twitter, and I was like, this is cool. You have I'm putting Kevin Eastman Studios down below, because you found a big pile of crazy this week, didn't you? You found some stuff that you haven't found before, or?
Yeah, no, it's fun because it's like I'm a bit of a pack rat. Anybody that knows me and knows me well is that I save everything. So many archival things, and whether it be just the simplest scrap of paper with some kind of doodle and noodle or a note on it, to especially some of the toy stuff from back in the day, which I love that. And so it was one of those. Courtney and I were moving around some stuff, actually looking for something else, and we have had this toy box that has sat in a kind of this little mini library / we call it a mud room, but it's in San Diego. How much mud is there, really, right? So we had this toy box, and we're like, man, we haven't looked in this in like 5 years. Let's, what's in here? And so we sort of pulled it out, and we were like, oh, wow. And so it was a nice revelation of finding some really fun prototypes and artifacts and items, like turtle roller skates and things that we haven't seen for years. And because certainly back in the day, again, you were around during that time of all those nutty licensing things that would have, like there's this pristine pair of turtle roller skates that we were just like, whoa, we're thrilled to have it, of course. But they were like, some of the items we found were one of the very first licenses we did, even before Playmates and those kind of things. It was a company called Dark Horse Miniatures, and they made these little lead figurines, and it was made to accompany the role-playing games, that people would buy them and paint them and use them as part of their role-playing. And so we found some of the original role-playing little lead figurines still in the package from 1986 and 87, and it was just, and it was foreign editions of, some from Turkey, some from Russia, a bunch of Japanese editions, and so just treasure nonetheless. And we sort of pulled it out, and some of the stuff that we had duplicates of, we're going to start a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles auction site that should go live in the next week or so. We're sort of working out the bugs in it, so people that not only within Kevin Eastman Studios, the stuff that we have and some of the treasures that we have, but other fans and collectors who are outside can post stuff for sale. It's kind of like an official Turtles eBay site. But that's coming together. We should launch that soon. But yeah, it's a treat to see some of that stuff we haven't seen in ages.
Yeah, man. I don't know if it makes me feel. The first time I ever felt old in my life was when I was sort of like going around my business, and someone said, "Oh yeah, Ninja Turtles. Yeah, that's a classic. It's like a classic reissue now from back in the day when I was a kid." And I was like, oh man, like all the blood drained out my face. Like apparently now we're just like nostalgia, which is a really bad place to live in. Like we're nostalgia, right? But that's cool, man. I mean, you got that stuff. So you got an auction site coming up. Do you know when that's launching?
No, I'll find it. Stay tuned to Eastman Studios. I know that they, because within the site we have, a fan club membership section, which is, people that join for a small fee, and you get access to a bunch of behind the scenes, that kind of stuff, plus discounts and all that. So we just want to balance the fairness of the fan club members with just anybody that just wants to come in, because we want to make the site as fun for, you don't have to join the fan club to enjoy the site, because there's just tons and tons of free stuff that you can have access to. In fact, I was actually, we were chatting just a minute before, and I just said that one of the other things that Courtney and I found were the original David Wise, Patty Howarth scripts from Turtles, the first 5 episodes that were done, some of the revisions of those, as well as some of the original drawings, some of the original concept drawings, some of my original concept drawings done at the animation studio. So that's the kind of free stuff you'll see on the site if you want to just come and see what draft 1, draft 2, and draft 3, all from 87. Early 1987 stuff. So that's the kind of fun stuff we want to make it fun for the fans to come in.
Yeah, I just remember, like, if I think about all the things that were coming through, I think about all those figurines. You don't realize in the moment that 30 years from now, these things are going to be like crazy, right? Like the little lead figurines, there were thousands of those bloody things sitting around, and there were, but then the value, they're different now, right? There were lots of things that came through. The only thing that I think I have, because I don't really have much from those days, I've got one thing that I don't know if you've ever seen before, and I'll have to send you a picture of it. It's a watch that was sent to us. I don't know who sent it in. And it was like a gold watch, but it had like the cover of it had like a gold thing. I've always just kept it in a cupboard. I don't even know if you've ever seen it. I'll take a photo of it. It was like a thank you very much Mirage Studios kind of present. You know what I mean? It wasn't like a licensed product. It was more like, oh, look, we made this for you or something, you know? It's about the only thing I've got, except one Leonardo plush toy. So that's it, right? Anyway. All right, so all of that stuff is there, and you guys can go to kevineastmanstudios.com and take a look at it. And thanks, PJ, for loving the chat. So let's get into the main thrust of what we're talking about, right? I'm going to kind of set the scene. Last time we talked about Tundra Publishing, and to set the scene, Tundra Publishing was your publishing endeavor that you had created sort of as a follow-on from your success with the Ninja Turtles at Mirage. And because you love comics so much, and because you're so reverent to some of these artists and creators, you went, I'm going to do a publishing company. It's going to benefit creators. It's going to be amazing. It's going to, you know, bring in all the best. And we did. We brought in Alan Moore. We brought in Neil Gaiman. We brought in Dave McKean. We brought in Kent Williams. We brought in George Pratt. We had people all over the place that were just the best of the best. Yep. And last time we talked about how difficult this was. We kind of didn't understand. Why was it so difficult to make it work? And we began to find that there were some interesting sides to the business of comics that we sort of hadn't really expected, even though we weren't born yesterday. But here's this publishing company. It's got the best. And sort of when last we left off, kids, we had published Alan Moore's Big Numbers, expecting to sell about 200,000 copies. And the first run had sold 2,500. And we said, what the hell is going on? Right? I was at various times for Kevin, I was the director of publishing, director of licensing and marketing, which we didn't really do much. I took on director of promotion because I kind of had to, because we lost an employee, but that was for a small time. I was an editor-in-chief there, and so I was pretty tired, and we were trying to run all these different businesses. I remember a time, Kevin, where I went to the doctor because I didn't feel very well, and I was really tired, and they said, you have a bleeding stomach ulcer. And how was I? Well, I was 25 years old, I think, 24, and I had a bleeding stomach ulcer because I was so stressed out, right?
No, I wasn't laughing because you had a bleeding ulcer. I was laughing because that was it, just only a bleeding ulcer. You know, like you're inside out and all your organs were outside of your body or something. Great. It was it was pretty stressful, but it was.
Well, as you know, we had bleeding stomach ulcers and PTSD, right? I mean, that's basically the truth. We had PTSD, and so we had this incredibly difficult kind of thing. And from your perspective, you know, you're the owner and the creator of the company, and I'm sure that it had its own stresses as well, right?
Well, yeah, you know, and it's one of those things that you know, and you know, my experience in publishing was Mirage Studios, which was incredibly limited in the scheme of things. In fact, that we had you know, we had a very small, you know, it was just publishing Turtles at one point, and we were very lucky because it was a very successful run. The sales were going up and up and up for a long period of time. So we took on other projects, Black and White Publishing, during that, you know, mid to late-ish 80s, before the official boom and bust. So the kinds of things we were doing and what we were experiencing were pretty much, you know, this much. But it was always like, you know, when things were going great, you know, you were the champion, you were the best. But when sales, even in, you know, referring to the Black and White sales, when the sales started going down, everybody sort of went like, they didn't look at, you know, the audience or the quality of the work, or, you know, look at all the other factors that might be a factor in declining sales on a thing. And that, in this case, the market was basically dying. You know, stores are going out of business, and they look at that lagging sales and they blame the publisher. It's like, well, you're not doing enough advertising, you're not doing enough promotion. And it was just one of those that, you know, it's like, well, it was what it was. And then what happened when Tundra evolved as a publisher, it was, you know, the one thing looking back, as hindsight's always 20/20, is one of the things that happened that I look back on the company where it was very creator friendly. It was proactive in that we wanted to publish, create their own projects, those creations that they've, had in a closet or shelf or in their brain for years, their dream project, their great novel of a lifetime, and all those kinds of things. You want to figure out a way to create a mechanism that can bring that project to life. And I never realized until later that no matter what happened within the structure of Tundra, no matter how hard you worked, I worked, Mark Martin, all the people that we had on the team worked to the point of getting bleeding ulcers. It was never a marketplace issue or a distribution issue. It was a Tundra Publishing issue. So when you would say like, and Alan was always very, you brought up Alan, which I'm going to zero on that for a second because we can go to others, but it was one of those things where he was very understanding and he had a number of experiences. But when you say to him, it's like, well, we thought it should sell this 100,000, 200,000 copies or whatever, and it sold 2,000 copies. And he's like, Alan would be in this, very deep, sort of thick accented, sort of like, well, we had a lot of enemies out there. You never know. Maybe the timing isn't right or what. But I think it was, and he was one of the kindest people. And he was great to work with, and he knew. In every conversation I had with him, he knew how hard we worked to make sure that Lost Girls, we could try to find an audience, that from hell we could find an audience, that there was a bad series of unfortunate incidences with big numbers that allowed that to not go forward the way that it should. And then you sort of look at, to sort of level the playing field, say you had a guy like Mike Allred who brought Madman to us. And it's like, every time I see Mike, I give him the biggest hug ever. His family, his wife, Laura, everybody is the greatest people on the planet. And he was nothing but positive and excited. And he loved, he had so much passion for it that everything he did with Madman was to make that project that was his dream project all that it could be. He promoted it and he did that. He was just one of those experiences. To then you had other people that no matter what you did and how far you went, it was your fault the book wasn't selling. It was your fault that you did something wrong. It was there, so you sort of had that whole thing. But it again, going back to the hindsight thing, is that at the end of the day, when you're a publisher and the publisher and you're trying to make a difference and you're trying to do things, if it doesn't go well, you get the blame, period. It's not, it's like, I'm continuing to babble on here, but I remember there was a conversation with, say Dave, an artist like, there was an artist who sold a lot of books for another publisher that was a superhero comic. And it was very, very successful. His next book was this lengthy sort of study of characters and relationships and the human condition. And
if I may, I think it was about like the artistic process, right? Like how art comes about, right? That was kind of a lot of it was about that.
Yeah. So you followed a cat around this building and these buildings and these infrastructures as you walked into different people having in-depth conversations about these very deep and important. And I actually love Cages, to go straight to the meat. I love Cages very much, and it was a fantastic book, but it was like, it just sold, fuck all. We couldn't, it should have sold a lot more, but it was just like, so when you look at like, when you have a conversation and you go, well, your book that sold 300,000 copies was called Arkham Asylum. It was in the Batman universe, and it was every bad guy in the Batman universe and Batman and Robin in this insanely beautifully painted book. And this is very different. It was like black and white, 2-color, sort of this whole wonderful experiment, which I adored. But it just, you're not going to have people that read Batman and the Joker and that kind of universe suddenly discover Cages and it's going to change their life. It just was not there. So, but that wasn't the content fault. That was the publisher fault. And I bring that up as an example, not to like, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I'm just saying, I love that book. I have a copy of the hardcover collection over there, and it's like, and it's one of my favorite books. But the fact is that, you know, it just didn't sell, and there's a reason it didn't sell.
Right.
The market wasn't ready for it.
Yeah, it may be that the market wasn't ready for it, but there's another thing that happens too. Like when I wrote The Origin of Wolverine, you figure this is like it was actually, crazy enough, it was the #1 selling comic for 10 years. So that's how big that event was, right? So I'm about to come out with it. And that entire year I had a book called The Agency that I really loved. And it was like a smaller book that I did with Top Cow. And I loved that book and I was super excited about it. So every time I sat on a panel, I'd be, The Agency, you're going to love it. Because I'm like, hey man, I've got enough of a forum right now. I may as well try to sell The Agency, right? The books come out, nothing. Like Wolverine Origin sold out across the world on the first day. Day one, yeah. You couldn't buy a copy. It made no difference to anybody. By the way, I just have to comment on this. I love this. Mostly live, Paul does look a little stoned. I promise I'm not stoned, but I am sleep deprived.
I was sleep deprived.
I never sleep, man, but I love the fact that I look stoned. It's great, actually. Sorry about that. Anyway, so I've seen it myself. I've been in a situation where I have a book that is like the biggest book in 10 years. It didn't make a single difference to a single copy of The Agency. The Agency sold what it was going to sell. That being said, I would have thought that Alan Moore, just by doing a book, was going to be worth 60 to 70,000 because he always was up to that point. Nope. We come out with From Hell and it's 2,600 copies. So there we were in it. And a funny story about Cages, by the way. I don't know if you knew this. Did you know that I drew a cat in Cages? And let's be clear, you know that I can't draw, right? I can't draw for shit, right?
I still have some Ardnut drawings somewhere in my collection.
You got some Ardnut drawings. Okay, that was my character. So I called Dave McKean and I said, I'm reading the script. And in the script, it says that the cat walks by. Dave, there's no cat in the artwork. You missed one. Do you want to send me a picture or something? And he's like, no, just go ahead and draw it. And I said, Dave, I can't touch your artwork. There is no way that I'm going to draw a cat. And I said, I'll get someone to do it. And he said, oh, you can do it. Don't worry about it. So I went to Mark Martin and I was laughing. And Mark Martin was our art director. And I said, Mark, I'm not kidding you. Dave McKean just told me to draw on his book, right? Now, just to be clear, I wasn't going to draw on the book. I was going to draw it and then stick it on and then get rid of it as quickly as possible, right? But I spent maybe 5 hours trying, and I finally came up with something that looked like one of his cats. And that is what ended up in the book. So that's somewhere awesome. In this magnum opus of Cages is one piece of the only published Paul Jenkins artwork that ever existed.
It's awesome.
So proud of myself.
No, that's good. No, I love it. I love those little things because it's like by the time we get to big numbers, I'll tell you as I have
Oh, no, time out. I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say. You got to save that. You got to save that for big numbers too, because I know what you're going to say. Yeah. Just so that we're clear, everybody out there, the big numbers story has been speculated and we'll set it up for you. But both Kevin and I know the absolute truth of that story. And we're going to tell you the truth of that story tonight because it's a very interesting story and kind of a tragic story, right? All right. So we're doing Cages. We're doing these books. And what we begin to learn is that the one factor that perhaps we hadn't considered as much was whether or not the creators would fully buy into these books. We thought that they would, but at what point did you get a sense, Kev? Because let's be fair, right? We can blame ourselves for the things that didn't work. We're not doing blame. We're just telling what happened. At what point did you get a sense that maybe a lot of people were just coming at you for the money to do the book, and they didn't care about what Tundra represented?
Well, that's a good point because whether I'm still being a bit naive and looking back, but there were some, and I can't think of, and I have a few in mind that I think were of that, but it seemed like, in my opinion, it was like, the people that were bringing projects initially were very sincere and very intent on, they loved the idea of Tundra. They loved the idea of so much of the change that was going on in the comic book marketplace anyway, as a general thing, and sort of ways to move it forward and ways to follow up with the, like, I remember, when Mouse came out, and Art Spiegelman's Mouse, and you'd see these amazing write-ups and these beautiful reviews, and for such a tragic and intense and important topic, and there'd be these notes that say, well, Art Spiegelman would say, like, well, it's a graphic novel, and people say, well, that's not a graphic novel, it's a book, it's a novel, and he said, no, it's a graphic novel. I wanted to do it in comic book form because of this reason. So it was sort of something that started opening that door to, an art form that we'd already loved, but this was an evolving art form from, guys like, following up with, Frank Miller from Dark Knight, and of course Watchmen, and so many other projects that were sort of coming along at that time. So I feel like there were a lot of artists that brought stuff, and I immediately think of, say, George Pratt, for example, which, he was a big friend and a fan, and I was a fan of his work, and I just loved his work on Enemy Ace so much, and he'd show me all these preliminary drawings and studies he'd done in the trenches of World War I when the story took place, and I just said, let's evolve this into, an art book and the study of that, because it's a lot of stuff that we can do. So that was like something that I thought was pretty sincere. We mentioned Madman, and we had Lost Girls, and there were a couple of other things, and I'm thinking, like, I remember trying to think of something that sort of stood out as
well, we had The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus with Mike Plug, which was, this beautiful looking book. I mean, it was going to be incredibly done. We'll talk a bit about the Peter Pan saga, but let's be clear, that Peter Pan book was beautiful, right? It was going to be, if it had actually existed.
Well, one of the things that popped to mind was, and you'll relate to this very much, was the things that we jumped on as an opportunity, and I mean that in the most respectful sort of it had to be published sense, was Skin, when the Skin novel came out. Skin. I think it had been rejected by every publisher in the UK, and it was based on the thalidomide, what would you call it? Not misdiagnosis, or the fact that they had prescribed it.
Yeah, it was basically, so what happened with the thalidomide drug was that a lot of people, they didn't really do like what the FDA would do with the drug. They didn't test it properly. They gave this drug during pregnancy for a load of kids who probably were like 5 or 6 years ahead of me. And these kids all ended up being malformed by the thalidomide drug. And so the story was about, a person who had the thalidomide drug, right? And it was malformed and all that kind of stuff. People would have like shriveled arms and legs and stuff like that, all because of this drug. And that was an incredibly important story, that one, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I feel like, the kinds of stuff that's like, it's sort of, it's probably a combination of some people bought some projects that I believed in them more than maybe the project merited in that. And that sort of goes back to sort of trying to make more careful publishing decisions and stuff that was sort of more risque, I think, like we talked about, like Rolf Stark's Rain. And I think Rolf, just by, I found him fascinating as a person. I found his story fascinating. But even, I knew when I agreed to publish the book, I said, if we sell 100 copies of this, I'm going to be impressed. And it was sort of one of those, I felt like, if you look past, some of the crudeness of the artwork, and, because again, I came out of a lot of my experience in appreciation of comics came from a lot of underground comic books, and underground comic books were a lot of different artists that were, they couldn't. Underground comics exist because they couldn't get jobs in mainstream comics, but they loved comic books. So they might not be the guys that could draw the best or tell the best stories, but they were telling important stories, however crudely and esoteric and interestingly, their own artistic style, a true artistic form. But it just wasn't something that would increase the sales or could go mainstream, but you appreciate it. No. So some of these things that I chose were, John Burgeon did a book for us called Bonesaw, which I thought was a beautiful, interesting, almost like it predated Snowpiercer, which is a series on, it was about a train that moved perpetually around the planet. And it's just one of those like, wow, isn't that something like a Snowpiercer that's on, but but it was kind of the seed ideas and the rawness and the energy that they brought to the stuff that attracted me, and those unfortunately were the ones I think which were ended up being the most costly and expensive mistakes, and they just sort of didn't help the overall sales of what it's stuff that we were spending time on that we should have been spending time on something else, but I felt it was important. So,
but listen, I'm never going to disagree with you that we publish some important books that may never found an audience, right? I don't care. Like, I mean, we can care because it costs money, right? But we published work that was interesting and important. Rain. So to set the scene for anybody, because no one here who's watching or will watch is going to understand what Rain would have been. Rain was a book about a guy called Rolf Stark. He had done his own book. It was very much about his mental health issues. He was very honest. He opened up about what was going on with him. As you told the anecdote last time, like Rolf actually pointed out to you, he was a real character, and he sort of went, yeah. When I draw, I paint in the nude. We're like, I'm not surprised, Rolf, right? He was a
cross-dressing.
Yep.
Driver for a hitman in Europe.
Yes.
And some stories and some of the stuff he told, he's like he was wearing a dress and he would drive and there'd be some hit, and it was just sort of, we'd go through some of his experiences after World War II and stuff, and it's sort of one of those like you'd have these super intense conversations with Rolf, and you'd be like, you'd believe them, and I think that maybe over the years they got more intense and more detailed, but I think that there was a basis in those real life things that I think he actually experienced and stuff, and it was, and he, like you said very appropriately, I think it was cathartic for him too, is that some of his mental health issues and some of his other issues that he processed while doing that book, and it was just. God bless him. It's like I saw him recently at a show with him.
Really?
Years ago, yeah, we did a show, and Courtney and I did a show in Framingham, and he came out with his daughter Rachel and showed me some of the he was working on and stuff, and he looks exactly the same.
He looks the same. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
But anyway.
Yeah, so we publish books that people will never hear of, right? They'll never remember them. They'll never hear of them again. We also publish books that were seminal works. So let's get one of them. Understanding Comics. Right? Mm-hmm. Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud is one of the seminal works in comics, and it began life at Tundra Publishing, right? We had some incredible work that came to us, and there were some good people, man. Alan Moore, to me, was always one of the best people that we worked with. He was completely honest. He was a total gentleman. He was a great guy. He was always really kind to me, and I was a kid, and I would get his giant scripts, and I would talk with him about his scripts. I visited him in Great Britain twice, one time with you, I think, one time by myself driving up. And Alan was really kind and spent time with me talking about writing. So you're talking about a legend in this business, but he had time for us. Even to this day, I guarantee that if I were to call up Alan Moore after not speaking to him for many years, I'd say, hello, Alan, it's Paul Jenkins. And he'd go, hello, Paul. Right, mate? Because that's exactly how he answered every single time. Totally good guy. I love George Pratt. His artwork is brilliant, right? We had all these incredible people. And Scott McCloud, that work, Understanding Comics, is literally one of the standard works that people go to understand comics, right? So it's not like we didn't publish anything that had merit. We published some amazing work, man, and it's a credit to us that stuff came through our doors.
You know, it's funny. I think just for a bit of a digression, because it's so much fun. And the first time I went to see Alan, because Tundra Publishing was based in Northampton, Massachusetts, and Alan, interestingly enough, lived in Northampton, England. And the first time I went up to see him, it was just great, because I was actually a huge fan, so I was pretty nervous to meet him. So we landed, and I went straight up from the airport so it's probably about a 3-hour drive up, plus after flying all night. So by the time I got there, I was probably pretty disheveled anyway. But I got there about noon, and he opens the door, and he looks like he just got out of the shower. So he, hey, come on in, just wonderful, warm, loud, just talking and stuff. And so we sit down in the living room, and he pulls out this tray from underneath his couch that he was sitting in, and it was like, part of it had weed, part of it had hash, part of it had tobacco. And so he rolled this Bob Marley like blunt. It was like 3 papers long, and I don't smoke weed. I didn't then, and it was just I started getting really scared, like he's going to ask me to smoke, and if I don't, it's whatever. And so he rolls this very large thing, and he's talking the whole time, just wonderfully and pleasant. We're just getting on nice, and he starts smoking, and it was I realized about an hour into the visit that was just for him to smoke and enjoy as part of his conversation. And I spent the whole afternoon there. We had just the most wonderful time, and every time that I saw him since was just that pleasant and all that.
Yeah. He was very kind. He was very kind to me, because I have a bit of an affliction. I'm actually allergic to it, and it makes me feel really sick. And he wants it all the time. So we would go outside the back, or we walked through Northampton town and sat together when I went to visit him by myself. He was really kind to me about that. So one thing that I had a chance to see, and again, we'll get to Big Numbers fully, but at one point I was working on Big Numbers, which is Alan Moore's like Samuel Taylor Coleridge Kubla Khan, like that's his unpublished work. And we're working on it. And Alan says to me, "Hey, Paul, do you want to see the breakdown?" And I go, "Yeah, man, great." And he pulls out a giant folded thing. You probably saw it too at one point. May have been the same trip. And he unfolds it, and it's literally everything that happens with every character for the entire series. And it was a piece of genius. I mean, if we'd have had iPhones then, I would have been trying to take pictures of it, because that thing probably doesn't exist anymore. But it was every character doing everything. There's a comment here. Tundra must be the only publisher that Alan Moore didn't burn bridges with. No, we crashed and burned before he could, I suppose. But Alan,
no, it's funny. Just a good.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was saying a cool segue into segue back to Understanding Comics, which was another such a Scott and his wife Ivy and they come up a bunch of times, and when he so we're talking about things, because we were huge fans of his original Zot and some other stuff he'd done, but similar to what you described with Alan is when Scott brought up his first rough draft of Understanding Comic Books, it was laid out in a similar fashion, where he literally was sort of cut and pasted and taped together this dummy. So you remember it, this is mock-up book of, it was a big chunk of it. He that was his first pitch. It was probably 40 pages of what he developed, and he'd already sort of gone through, and it was all blue pencil and drawn and this kind of stuff. And so he said, "This is where I want to span this section and this section." And I just looked at this roadmap of what he did, not only for the level of intelligence and thought and detail and the methodologies and the things that he had researched and figured out in his mind of how comics worked and how to understand them, because it is a very unique thing in so many ways, and he'd broken it down. I just thought it was just a masterpiece. And so that was where that was one of those projects that it was brilliant. I was lucky to have been a part in that, moving that forward down the line. So if you look at it, if you actually look at it, if you read the book, and if you saw that dummy book that he made, Scott
articulated how comics are made in a way that I've been able to explain to people since. I mean, I learned so much from reading it, and I do them and you do them. And it's like when you work in the business and you read what Scott McCloud says, you're like, this is perfect. This is a great way for me to explain how storytelling works in comics. I've definitely incorporated some of his ideas into the way that I try to explain this stuff because it was genius. So his work was brilliant. So we've established, right, that there was some good stuff. There were some great people. And as we talked about last time, one thing that was kind of nice, right? The Tundra crew, for the most part, there were some difficult people in there. But the Tundra crew, we kind of loved each other. I remember people coming up to my house for my birthday party, and the guys in the warehouse around the back, like I said, like Kevin Russell and Kelly and Steve Wardlaw and those guys, John Meeks, and those were great guys. And we would hang out around the back, and the people, there were some good people at Tundra, and we really did care about each other, and we had a good time, right? And so into all of this, I think it's fair to say that there was a darker side to some of this stuff. And as a young guy, I first noticed it in a couple of ways. I think that the first time that you're exposed to maybe somebody that's kind of like a criminal, like actually really genuinely a criminal, you don't believe it. You don't think that you're talking to someone that's not telling the truth or maybe trying to take money or stuff. You don't realize it's happening. And then when it happens to you, you sort of say like, hang on a minute, like what happened there? Like you never think the mob is real until they're real, right? So I'm not saying the mob was around Tundra. That's not my point. I'm saying that you don't know that you don't believe that people are bad, although I would be surprised, but you don't think people are bad until they're bad to you. And then you suddenly realize like, damn, they were always going to be bad. And I didn't realize it. And I think that you and myself and some other people, we're a bit naive because we honestly thought that everybody was going to want the same thing that you did. We thought that they would want to advance the medium and love comics. And man, did we find out in a hurry. And so my first time that I found out was when we bought the pre-press house down the street, and we needed them to prepare all of our film. So if you think about it, and this wasn't nothing to do with the creator, I had to go down there, and you said to me, listen, man, it's a production thing, so we got to get them working. And I drove down to that pre-press house, and I spoke to the two guys that were there, and I said, well, what's your production calendar? And they looked at me and they're like, what do you mean a production calendar? What are you talking about? And I said, listen, a production calendar, like here's January. This is what we're making on January 3rd, January the 4th. This is when we need to finish a job. Here's when the next one comes in. What have you guys got? And to answer the question, by the way, that Jasny asked here, what is pre-press? Pre-press is all the preparation and the advanced work that you do to turn stuff into film and then turn it into printing, right? So it's the film that we would send over to the printer. And so we had this place that had a specific agreement with Tundra Publishing to do this. I'm a young guy. I'm now basically being sent over there to kind of make them answerable to us, almost like their boss in some way. But I'm too young to be their boss. They're older guys, but I'm there to make sure they do their job. Man, I go over there and they pretend that they've never heard of a production calendar before. And at that point, as a young guy, I'm like, I'm not taking that shit. Yes, you do. Like, we need a production calendar. And I'll never forget that the first day that I went over to check on some of them, I've got all these people resenting me. They didn't like me because I was going to make them actually do some work and account for what they were supposed to be doing. It seemed only fair. And I walked in, and in those days, you had a drum scanner, and someone had wrapped a piece of art around a scanner, and you spun the scanner really, really quickly. And that is how you read the artwork and you projected it, right? You couldn't just take a photo of it. You had to spin it. And so someone had run it on a scanner. It takes about 20 minutes. And then because of the computing power, they had scanned it upside down. And now they were waiting for the computer to turn it the right way up. And in those days, it was a 6-hour endeavor to turn the right way up. And I asked the guy, what are you doing watching this thing? And he's just sitting there with his arms crossed, looking at a computer. And he said, I scanned it upside down. I've got to wait for it to turn up the right way. And I asked him, how long does it take? He said, 6 hours. I asked him, how long does it take to rescan it? He said, 20 minutes. I'm like, then fucking rescan it. What are you doing? because those guys were drawing a check, getting you to pay their lives. They didn't care about the work. They didn't care about making money. They didn't care about anything. They were all set. And that kind of thing was the very first time that I realized, hang on a minute, there are people around here and they're not good people, you know? And so I remember going back to you, telling you about it. You were like blood coming out your eyeballs, you know? And I'm like, you know, I'm going to give it a shot, man. I'm going to go try work with these guys. And then we had your uncle Quentin got involved and we were all trying to make these people do the job, you know? But man, that kind of attitude was around us a lot, right?
Yeah, because it's funny because, you know, again, with pre-press in those days, because everything's digital these days, you know, everything's scanned on the computer and prepped and all that way. But like you mentioned it when we were talking last time about, you know, stripping film, like you literally would scan the pages either through some photographic systems or scan them on the drum and SciTech machines and those kinds of things, which were new innovations. But it was the whole concept was we were buying this pre-press house that would cut down on our costs for scanning and getting everything press ready. But it goes back to, and I just remember the first year of dealing with these guys, and it it was all that you said and so much more. They would just ruin thing after thing after thing. And it just reminded me of when Pete and I first started printing with, I think it was the Lakeville Journal was the press, the actual company that we printed the first issue of the Turtles with. And I remember the first time Peter and I went into their office in New Hampshire, the president of the company just had this desk in this surrounding area with just piles and piles of paper. And it was just disheveled and disorganized and just, you could just see like, how could you find anything? And I commented to Pete, I said, I don't know if we should print with this guy. I mean, did you see his office? It was a disaster area. Can we trust them to get it done right? And I kid you not, it was like some of our most valuable comic books in the Turtles universe have come out of this guy's fuck ups. Like he would print something and it was like, you know, you trim it and part of the pages were trimmed off, or like the most infamous is Turtles #3. We had dropped issue 3 off. You know, and he had it for about a month, and we were like getting ready to do this show in New York, and we were like, we really need this not only to ship it to distributors who have orders, but we're going to go to this show in New York. And so he said, "Oh, I'll when do you need it?" And then we said, "Well, 2 weeks ago, but how can we get 500 copies so we can take to New York?" And so we ran them through really fast, and he didn't scan the cover the right way. It was just a black and white piece with Rubylith where you sort of lay the tones in. You scan them together and you print them with a different ink. Well, he scanned it incorrectly, so it was this really blotchy cover. Now those like 500 books, I think they go for like $3,000 or $4,000 a piece. Just grew up. But it was one of those things that, you know, what turned out to be, this is going to save us a lot of money for some very expensive processes for printing, you know, Dave McKean's high quality covers.
Right. It was a two-color book with a high quality cover. Yeah, absolutely.
It's like that. So that was like the bleeding ulcers and bleeding eyeballs and bleeding everything.
It really was, man. I would drive in between the two businesses because I think they were down the street about a mile and a half, and I would drive in between the two businesses constantly. I spent my whole day driving for months. And the crazy thing is, no matter what I did, and no matter how hard I tried, and no matter how reasonable I was, and no matter what we kind of did as a group, they still wouldn't do a production calendar. And we would say, listen, you know, you have to do a production calendar. We need to know a few things. And it's pretty obvious what we need to know. How much money are you making? Where is the money? What did you sell last week? What job are you doing to sell pre-press work? How are you scheduling our books? How are you scheduling the other books? This is basic. I've got a 5-year-old in pre-K. Hey, 5-year-old in pre-K, what are you working on? And the 5-year-old says, I'm drawing a rabbit. And you go, well done, Jimmy, right? They wouldn't answer those questions. What are you working on right now? Well, you see, what happened was, and you go like, no, I don't want to hear this shit. I just want you to tell me how this, and that became like a strange kind of moment for me as a young guy, for us as a company. I didn't understand how the hell we were going to get these people to do their job. And at a certain point, I remember coming to you And myself, Kelly, Meeks, we sort of sat around and we were like, man, this isn't just not working. This is really not working. Now what do we do? You know?
Mm-hmm.
That's a challenge, right? So let me kind of add in the first time that I began to realize, wait a minute, I'm not so sure that the creators are in on this. I'm going to tell you an anecdote. It's not going to name any names. But I was an editor on a number of books because we had the Straw Bosses, right? And you'll know which book I'm talking about. I mentioned last time that we had an accountant who had an Excel file that basically was a formulaic kind of sheet that tells us how the accounting works, and it tells us projections and costs, and we add the costs in. We get quotes from printers, and we work out how many books we have to sell. So, you know, if you want to break even on this book, sell 12,000 copies, sell 3,000 copies, sell 20,000 copies. And as I said last time, there was one project that we had that the formula was wrong, and I could tell it was wrong. So I found the problem in the formula, and I corrected it, and it said, warning, danger, Will Robinson, you have to sell 130,000 copies of this book. And we're like, well, we've sold 2,500 copies of Big Numbers of Alan Moore's new book. So I don't think we're going to be selling 130,000 copies to break even. So imagine that we're dealing with this problem. I now had to go and get in touch with the creators. And there were two creators. There was a writer and a very famous artist on this book, someone with a lot of clout who had done a lot of great work. The writer, I would say, not quite so much. And so I called the writer and I said, look, we have a problem. And I know it's creator controlled stuff, but we got to talk to you about this. You guys have told us the paper, the packaging, the gold leaf, the front. I mean, you've got these production values that are insane. We can't make a book like this. You're telling us what we have to make, and we're telling you it's going to cost us $17 a book to make. Right? $17 a book to make something stupid. We can't make those books because we sell them for 30. We're gonna like lose money on every book. Yeah. And I spoke with this writer and I said, can you please just let's work it out. You and me, we'll talk it through, and please do not call the artist. Please do not. She said, absolutely. We spent an hour on the phone. We put the phone down, and she called the artist immediately. And who do you think he called? You. And he screamed at you on the phone, and she was dishonest with me. She told me she wouldn't do it, and she did it anyway. Then she sent me an email and said, and I'll never forget it, it said in the email, how dare you, you are taking food from my children's mouths. And I'm like, I'm not taking food from your fucking, I'm literally taking like the silver spoon out of your mouth. You are joking. How could you accuse me of this? We just spent hours trying to solve this problem. You agreed to the solution just so that I would put the phone down so that you could go and scream at Kevin and tell everybody how unfair it was. And that was the first instance that I knew that, hang on a minute, I'm not so sure the creators are in this. And you know which book I'm talking about, I'm sure. We're not saying which one it is. So,
well, no, it's interesting. You know, it's they were just. You made me think of like, you know, a number of other instances where we sort of got into conversations with artists like, you know, I mean, we were big fans of the J.K. Potter, who was a fantastic. He was doing those really wonderful computer photo montage things, and so we talked about doing an Art of J.K. Potter book, but the only way that would work was he was very well known in bookstores, and we were getting a lot of consultation from Ian Ballantyne on how to get into bookstores and do those kind of things, like with like Tom Kidd's Nemo project and some other things like that just were exquisitely. I mean, Tom Kidd's Nemo and other books of that type, but and so we just said with this book, I said, you know, for what you're asking, the quality that you want, this is really something we do not have bookstore distribution. So we simply, I don't think we ended up doing that book at all. We explored it for a while, but there were other things like that we'd approached and try to make a proper go of it. But it was, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, it just wasn't economically viable. And that was, as we, even, it's funny because I bring up Nemo because Nemo was a project that had been developed, and it was this exquisite painter named Tom Kidd, and he was doing it under the artist name of Nemo, and he'd written it and was doing all these paintings. And it was just one of those things that we loved the project. Ian Ballantyne used to come up and discuss it, and we looked at this project, and it was just one of it's something that we ultimately never moved forward with the project after a certain point. Although I had invested a amount of money, and he was one of the good ones. Though he was such a great guy, but you realize that the only way this book could move forward was with a major publisher putting hundreds of thousands of dollars into just one singular project that had a mechanism that could get it into every Walden and Walden Books and Barnes and Noble and so many other things. And we tried, we explored that market for a while with some Turtle Books and some other things, but it's just absolutely treacherous turf to try to get material into a bookstore and make it work in any capacity. So we brought ourselves back down to what we could do in the comic market, which was where we were focusing on doing things like, I think around this time we had Tundra UK had evolved, and we were bringing in projects like Kingdom of the Wicked, which was really great. Lazarus Churchyard was really good. One of my favorites, I know your favorites as well, was White Trash.
Yep.
By Gordon Rennie and the late Martin Eman, who was just absolutely the loveliest person on earth. And if you've seen White Trash, people, it was sort of this insane tale of a guy that kind of looked like Elvis and another guy that kind of looked like Axl Rose on this insane road trip across America, which is just a fantastic series. So we were looking for more things that worked on that level, but again, the direct market in itself, that's our main focus, was still quite a beast to try to overcome.
But I mean, I think, one of the things that we learned really quickly, we all learned, right? You learned this, I learned this, everyone working at Tundra began to, anyone, the people who was that, think of it as your mum for a while, right? Your mum and I'm dad. So kid would come to me and go, "Hey dad, can I have an ice cream?" And I say, "Nope, you can't have an ice cream." And they come right to you and go, "Hey mum, can I have an ice cream?" And you're like, maybe. That kind of stuff happened to us all the time. Because I remember one time very clearly, this was one of my bleeding stomach ulcer moments. We were dealing with a French publisher, and we had film from that French publisher. This was on one of our bigger books. And again, I know you're probably going to remember this incident, but it was just, or some of it. So we're trying to get this book, and we were co-publishing this book with the French publisher. But by the time you looked at the deal, we weren't just co-publishing it. We were paying the page rate. We were doing all of the work. And for somehow we'd managed to get like the English speaking rights, and they had everything, and we were paying for it. And now they send us the film for us to print with, and it's terrible. It's unusable film. Because in those days, just like you look at the film and it's all bleached out. It was a copy of a copy of a copy. And our opinion was, we paid for this. Like, send us the original art or send us a first generation piece of film. What are you sending to us? So I, in charge of production, get on the phone with the French publisher, and I spend hours on the phone with this guy. And he's dishonest. He's not telling the truth. I'm fighting with him all day. I finally say, I'm not. And for one thing, the contract said that we would pay up to $80 a page for film. We're not naming any names, Rob. Okay, we're not naming any names. But I'm fighting over the numbers, and I said, I don't care if our contract says up to $80 a page or up to $100 a page. This film's worth nothing, and when you send us a correct film, you're sending us for $25 a page. And he goes, "Well, okay, then I'm so mad at you." And I'm like, "Listen, I don't care if you're mad at me or not, pal. We're not paying your life, paying for this stupid film. We're not paying for what you just sent us, and we're finished." I put the phone down, and I should have known. I didn't really think about it. I was just exhausted, like, damn, give me heroin or something. And I put the phone down, and what he had done was immediately call you and tell you the next story. And it wasn't the truth. It was just, oh, well, I've arranged this with Paul and this is what we're going to do. And I'm going to make sure you get the film and it's going to be wonderful. Anyway, can you authorize for me to be paid $100 a page for the film? And you go, oh yeah, cool. I'm glad you talked to Paul. And so then you authorized it. And then I find out that that bastard had basically persuaded you that it was going to be $100 a page for film. And it was a lie. And people would do that between you and myself and some of the other people in Tundra all the time. They would tell you a different story than me. And it was very important to us to keep trying to like be on the same page. But because we were so busy, I found that it was probably quite difficult, don't you? And because of who you were, you know, because of who you are, the creator of the Ninja Turtles, it's hard for you to be on top of all of those specific things, you know? So that was
yeah. It was like, it was a little bit of, not a little bit, there was a bunch of that kind of stuff going on as the company, like we talked about last time. There was a lot of things moving, a lot of things needed attention, and when you throw in a number of problems where you're dealing with the pre-press issues and all that kind of stuff with it, it's difficult. But it is like, I was just thinking of you know, bouncing back to sort of some of the people that we got into, and I'll mention Peter Pan again because we both adored that book when it came in. But that was a classic story of we saw the material, we saw the artwork, we saw where it was going, we fell in love with it, you know, and just said, oh my, just exquisite. But the stories that the artists, the creative team was telling you was this mythical sort of fantasy version of what the reality was, is what they, looking back, like this is the way they wished it could have happened before it was shut down at another publisher and brought to us. But the reality was that was all in their mind. So I think that was the sort of the misleading part of a project like that, where, you know, they had already pissed off, they'd taken money and not completed work, and they had pissed off that other publisher so badly. So they just brought it to you, and they would paint this picture where they said, well, the publisher was abusive to us, he was unfair, he was set unrealistic deadlines. He said, you know, they would say all these things, which were just flat out lies. So by the time you sort of got it and you got invested in the project and tried to make it a reality, even when you started figuring out the nuances of the problem, you were already in too deep, and it was hard to get out of it without, you know, yeah, look at that shit, man. That's just,
this is it. Peter Pan.
Yeah, it's stunning and more stunning. It just, I was laughing, not laughing, but I was just thinking, I remember you were telling me this story when you were working, you were working on a music video. I think you were directing it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I think it was one of the car crash ones and the stuff. You would work with this guy that was your sound guy, who had read the script, knew what you were doing, the breadth, the scope of what you guys were shooting, and it got to the scene where there was going to be an explosion and some fire. And your sound guy, and I might be misquoting exactly the story, but the sound guy knew this was coming. And by the time you teed up and got ready to shoot that scene, he announced to you, I don't work with fire.
Yeah, right. That's right. That is right. We had someone, you know, it's happening. And then right when you get to it, this diva comes to us and says, I don't work with fire. And you're like, listen, man, we got all the union requisites. We're doing it right. You know, we got the safety stuff. No, I don't work with fire. And you're like, I can't work forward if you don't work with fire. You're hijacking my production. So anyway, yeah, carry on. Yeah.
Well, that was it. It was like, so you get those kind of instances where, you know, it even went back to, you know, we touched on it a little bit last time. It was like, you know, with James Labar and the Crow, and it was just sort of like we signed a contract for all rights, and come to find out there was this mysterious document that was not disclosed to us at the time, that he'd also sold the movie rights to Ed Pressman. So when we took on all rights to the Crow, and then sort of were moving ahead, because I own part of Limelight at that time and those kind of things, and we were developing stuff for movies, entertainment side of the company, and so we started moving ahead with the Crow as that, and suddenly Ed Pressman comes out of the bushes and goes, well, I've got a deal for the Crow. Like this, Rob, yeah, this guy's earning his page rate. Yeah, he was fantastic.
Yeah, he was earning his page rate, man. He was good, but yeah, I mean,
well, no, even like, you know, I adore one of my, you know, best and wackiest, and I like Bob Burden.
Yep.
You know, we talked about Bob Burden, and flaming character creator. the Mystery Men, all that stuff. And it was just one of those things that I approached Bob because up until that point, he had not done any full collections. He was just still, because he's like a carnival barker / flea market salesman / marketeer on this level of like, I go to shows and that's the only place they can find me and the only place they can find my books. And so they pay premium prices and it's this and that and this and that. I said, but, the carrot's pretty popular, but, I think if you sort of reintroduce it to the whole audience, why don't you do collections of the carrot? And we'll do them at Tundra, we'll do these Flaming Carrot collections. And so I signed a deal with him on two parts. One, to explore and sort of figure out a way to do the Flaming Carrot collections, but it was also a couple of guys at Limelight, some of the commercial directors fell in love with the Flaming Carrot, and one was a guy named Matt Forrest, who was one of Limelight's biggest directors, commercial directors, and he was well known for he did Steamroller video for Peter Gabriel.
Oh yeah,
stop motion claymation. The stuff is just fantastic. So he loved, Sledgehammer. Yeah, so he loved Flaming Carrot. So he did this. I have it somewhere still. I need to find it. So he did this 3-minute test of stop motion Flaming Carrot, where it was like he would use like the like a maquette of a G.I. Joe thing, and then dress them up. And he made the carrot, and he made Bondo Man, and he made all these characters, and he'd move them and manipulate them and stuff. And he did this whole sort of funky test, and it was fabulous. And so I showed it to Bob, and he goes, I have an idea. Let's do them as marionettes, like the Thunderbirds. And I went, Bob, dude, seriously? I said, this is one of the most highest paid at that time, was the highest paid commercial directors. He did music videos and commercials and stuff he was doing Nike commercials and shit like this. This guy's, we could sell this as like a show or we do, some liquid television or something. He was like, nah, I want to do marionettes like Thunderbirds. And it was like, and the deal died.
Yeah, the deal died. And
you're like, oh.
And you know what's
crazy bills.
You know what's kind of funny about it, Kevin, is that's actually one of many examples, and I've had it happen beyond Tundra, where someone who's a creator is involved in this stuff and they kill a deal, right? I've got a project of mine that I felt very strongly that the artist had done a really good job. And I said, I'll tell you what, I've had this idea for a long time and I've been working on it, but I think that what you brought to it was a lot, and I'm going to give you half ownership of it. And it is the one and only time that I've ever done that, because it scared me straight, because that artist got in the way so badly. To every time I would have an opportunity or something that was good, he would say no because he could. And I would think, you don't know why you're saying no. You're just doing it because you think you're supposed to have an opinion. Come on, man. And that happened to us at Tundra loads of times. How many people stepped in the way of a deal? And these are creators that you respected, people that you love, people that you want to benefit. You want to have them, you want to help them. And I think it goes back to what we said last time, Kev. We didn't really give people creative approval. We kind of gave them creative control, and that was a mistake, I think.
It was, yeah, well, it was in the sense that, and it's a fine line, because it is like, the turtles, this is again just personal experience. The turtles happened exactly the way the turtles happened, because it was just Peter and I. It's a different set of circumstances, and I understand, but it's full creative control and full ownership and that kind of thing that made that work. And then, you wonder if it had not gone that route, and say it had gone to a publisher that had a vested interest in it and wanted some editorial say, then there is that instance where changes could have or would have been made that would have changed the concept. And I bring this full circle to the project I've done with co-creator David Avalone on this new project we've done with Ben Bishop, and it's called Drawing Blood. And the thing is that we showed it to a couple publishers early on just to say, hey, we love the Kickstarter route and all this stuff, but we feel like if we have a publisher behind this creator-owned concept, we feel like we can get exposure, wider, faster, wider, all that, and we feel like you can support this vision, and almost hands down across the board, every publisher we talk to, from Image and Dark Horse and Boom and Skybound and all that stuff, it was like they wanted full creative ownership, they wanted full creative control. They were paying for it. That they would have say that they one line they'd say, well, we'll give you can keep copyright of it, but we'll control all the entertainment and all the just everything else that goes along with it. And we'll have an editor, we'll help you get the story right and that kind of stuff. And that was where David and Ben and I just said, plus they were offering no money. It was like they say, we'll pay you in advance of $1,000 to $1,500 per book, and then everything else that was spent on that book, from obviously printing, any kind of advertising, any kind of service fees, technical fees, plus a percentage of overhead to the company. And I totally get all of that. But we recoup all of that first, plus a $2,500 fee for the use of our logo. And so we just were like, why would we ever work with you guys? It's like, it's like, so, especially when you have, the purest of art things like Kickstarter, which allows you full creative control. And that's what, we did. And, luckily Bishop had done a couple of Kickstarters. And so he helped us pull together and organize. And we had a consultant come in and help with the first Kickstarter in 2017. And that was.
Yeah. And just as an aside, like I'm going to be doing another Kickstarter for Fairy Quest. We'll show that in a second. But this is Drawing Blood. This is basically the way that I remember you looking when I would walk in your office at Tundra and go, hey, dude, guess what? And you'd go like, fuck no, please. Please, no, make it stop. But yeah, I mean, Kickstarter's a pure.
No, it's just because that's weird.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's funny about when people read Drawing Blood, and where Ben just turned in the last couple pages for issue 6, which is just, he's getting better and better. He's really fantastic. But it's funny because we're at the part of the series where if you haven't, you wouldn't have read this stuff because it's new. It hasn't been published yet. But it's a thing where we have this guy named Frank Forrest, which is a pseudonym for Wally Wood, which was one of the creators that I had in mind when I created this guy. Frank Forrest, Wally Wood. Yeah. But we made him look like Steranko in the comic series, and so Shane Bookman, our lead character, has made a lot of money from his radically rearranged run of Ragdolls, and then he had a separation with his brother Paul when they sold the property, and he's looking for this comeback and a way to give back to artists. So he forms this company called Siberian Arts. Tundra
Imagine that, right?
So he forms Siberian Arts and puts Frank Forrest in control of the company to help. He basically creates this Apple Records of comic books to help young creators and things succeed and get past the abuse of the major corporations that run the comic industry at that time. And then the guy rips him off, embezzles all this kinds of money, and puts him in the crosshairs of some Lithuanian gangsters and stuff. So that was the fun of Drawing Blood is exactly that. It's like it's a completely fictional true story, that we base it on some fact stuff, but it's also, you can have, like when we did the first Kickstarter and people said, oh, this is autobiographical, right? And I was like, well, by page 6 of issue 1, the two main characters, Shane Bookman and his friend Nigel Boswell, nicknamed Beastly, looks amazingly like Simon Bisley, are in a gunfight. And I said, I've never been in a gunfight, so it's sort of, there are some autobiographical bits and pieces within this series, but a lot of it's based on experiences that I've had, you had. you've told me experiences you've had in comics. I'm sure an anecdote or two that you told me, or more maybe, has ended up as an anecdote that becomes part of this completely fictional true story. And I certainly know.
Yep, no doubt.
You know,
And I mean, some of the
that's
things,
the fun stuff.
some of the things that shaped us, like these are things that shaped us. And when we finish today, I'll tell you. Remember last week I said there were two things that you told me that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. When we get to the end of the one today, I'll tell you the thing that you told me one time that I'll always carry with me for the rest of my life, and it's sad. Let me give you, so that people understand like the depths of difficulty. Understand that we were trying to do the right thing. We were a bunch of good people. Kevin had said, I did this for the benefit of creators. We were trying to make it work. We gave them the craziest good deal that was dumb, right? We gave literally the creators the best deal that they could possibly get. We broke our hearts and we worked really hard. And the one thing that I'll never forget, and it happened actually to me initially at Mirage, and it wouldn't affect me as a person, but it would affect people. You began to see greed, right? And let's not beat around the bush. Greed is nasty, right? There is a saying, I guess, from the Bible. It's not that money is the root of all evil. They say the love of money is the root of all evil. So quick little anecdote to get everyone kind of primed. You had a buddy, and it was kind of like not really a buddy of yours. It was sort of like someone that we knew in the town of Northampton. And this guy was a car salesman / kind of like mechanic. And he comes to me at one point and he says, hey man, I'll just, let me give you a good deal on doing the oil in your car. So he does the oil in my car, and I'm driving it down the highway about 2 weeks later, and it explodes. My engine explodes. And I go, whoa, what happened there? And I'm assuming something went. It turns out there's no oil in my engine, right? And so this guy, the guy destroyed my. Yes, Jasneet said, by the way, that is the thing that I left it with last week, which is Tundra was an itch that we can never scratch. And we're scratching it a little bit now, right? So anyway, this particular guy, he was someone that we knew. We kind of would have a beer with him at times. And we knew this guy, right? But it wasn't like he wasn't the close in a Tundra. He's just a friend of sort of the family, right? So anyway, now I take my car back to him and I say, hey, bud, listen. And he's like, oh, yeah, let me sort that out for you. Takes my truck, and replaces the engine. Charges me a bunch of money for a replacement engine. I pay it. He replaces it with literally a terrible engine that he got from a junkyard that didn't work. I go driving my truck, and now I'm trying to drive up a hill, and I'm going in like first gear. I can barely get up the top of a hill. I had to take that guy to small claims court. I had to like fight him in court. The sheriff showed up to get his money. He said, oh, it's round the back, and then tried to run away from the sheriff. And you probably remember the guy.
I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah. So this guy, I had to go. The sheriff took him out, right? And then the sheriff went and got the money from him, but it was like bad person, greedy, right? And you go, okay, but that was a local guy who knew us, and this is great. Sorry, this caught my eye. Tundra 2 must be implemented. No, Rob, no. Like, can you hear the words we're saying? So there's an example of greed, right? Well, what we never thought was that greed would enter the minds of the creators who you loved and revered and respected. You thought that the creators would go, man, thank you so much. I really appreciate you doing this for me, Kevin. And I get it. It can be seen as being naive, but it's not for a bad intention. You literally thought that these people would believe in us, right? So let me go to a story of greed that if anybody ever asks me, what's one of the worst things that ever happened to you at Tundra, or one of your worst stories, I tell this story every time. No names. Hey, man, you want to go look it up on the internet and try to find it yourself? You probably can. We had a creator who had a book that had originally gone to another publisher, and he brought it to us. That book that he brought to another publisher was not that successful, but people knew it, right? And what he wanted to do was to do collections of that book. And we said, okay, fine. And somehow he managed to get a contract, presumably from browbeating you and being the kind of, because he's a pretty greedy guy, a contract for X amount of dollars per page for about 5 collected editions of his book, right? And the fact is, he was the one handling all the money. So we had a super high page rate for the inks. We'd send it to him, and he was just getting young artists to just draw something and giving them almost nothing. And he was putting this stuff together. And we kind of knew it, and we had heard it from a couple of people, and we were like, this is starting to suck. This guy's greedy and greedy and greedy, and we've paid him way too much money, but we'll keep working at it. And I personally was getting sick of it. It wasn't something I consulted with you about. I mean, I talked with you about it, but we had a lot of things to do. And one day, this fucking arsehole sends me a page, and the inside cover of the book was supposed to be a graveyard, right? So what we expected was that all of the characters would be put on a gravestone, and there'd be crows and, ghosts inside the graveyard, and that he would write all of the credits onto this page, right? And instead, he sent me the basic template shape of a gravestone and charged me a full page rate. And I said, you got to be kidding me. And I called him up and I said, what are you doing? You didn't do any work here. You sent me something that you traced. And you're telling me that, and he said, well, the rest of this is a production problem, and I insist. And I said, you know what? I'm not even going to ask for permission for this. You're going to fly to us at Tundra Publishing across the country, because he lived on the other side of the country. You're going to fly and you're going to sit in front of me, and you're going to look me in the eye and tell me how I deserve to pay you for that page. And we cut off his production, and we made him fly and sit in the room with us and look us in the eye, because I was fucking furious, because he was a liar. And he ripped us off, and he was trying to rip you off, and he was basically taking money left, right, and center. And we sat him in the thing, and when he finished bullshitting us about how much we were going to pay him, we told him to get lost. But I found that to be the most revolting aspect of human behavior that I can think of, Kevin. They just thought, man, who cares? It's Kevin's money, so he's got enough of it. It's like saying, oh, yeah, I'm just going to steal from Walmart repeatedly. I'll just keep stealing from a company because, hey, they're a big company, right?
That's a good example. That was one, and luckily there weren't that many of those kinds of attitudes, but it was one of those that, like you said, we're having difficulty with them because it would be like he'd try to charge for an inside back cover, which was an ad. He said, well, that's part of the book, and I'm giving you an ad for the next issue. So, but it's just a paste up. And it was just, instead of like saying, throw in for, it's like, if you're embracing the spirit of creative control and self-publishing and the attitude that we were putting forth, and there's sort of the real cost, which is the time and energy of creating the page. And then there's this stuff that you just have to do to make the book complete. So you can get it. And then if you start feeling comfortable when you go, like, you're telling me you're comfortable with charging like what you said for this amount of work, and you feel that's worth the full page rate. And and they'd be like, oh yeah. And it's like, no, that's not going to work. But it's funny, sort of like, I find interesting, and I think that it's a good segue into, because they were, the thing is like, when I look back at the conversation, even on we're having today about Tundra, it was just one of those, like it's the itch you never scratch, or the things that you look at as what the experience that we had as the company as a whole, because it was, it was always good intention. And I think they were, and I know there were a lot of people that were very good intention when they brought stuff to it. There were some that were manipulating self-serve and sort of looking into, putting themselves in a position of, I always loved that Simon Bisley used to say, don't pad your part. They were making themselves more important than they were. The hierarchy or the sort of the situation. There were instances of misunderstanding and misleading information. But I feel like, one of the things that is probably the most fascinating about the whole Tundra experience was big numbers.
Yeah.
And big numbers at project to lead into that, because I think it's a good, at the hour and a half mark here. It was one of those things that we've already said how much we absolutely adored and still adore Alan Moore and what he was doing, how much we adored and appreciated everything that Bill Sienkiewicz brought to the comics community as a whole, that we knew that there was a relationship between those two people that had broken down at some point. And so it was when we went in to move that project forward, and you did a lot of work, most of the work on that, which was, coming up with a clarification and understanding between Bill and Alan to get it back on track. Bill back on board. You worked out he was doing issue 3. That would segue into a person that would work on issue 4. And I think you had booked Bill to do covers of 3, 4, and 5, and then that would sort of segue into that. So you mended the fences, you worked out the thing, and then we ended up. Oh yeah, that's gorgeous. This is from 3.
Yeah.
Or no, this
is from 3. This is from 3. This one's from 3. These were the unseen pages. There are some that I've got there. Here's the inside. I think it's the back cover to one. I think this one's in one of the earlier, but I love this page. I mean, this is just brilliant. This so whimsical.
It was just a fantastic concept, and it was really cutting edge in so many ways. And like we'd already mentioned in other conversations. Wow, look at that. This is from issue 3.
Yeah.
We'd already talked about the depth and the detail of the scripts that Alan was writing. It was one of those things that, had it been completed, it is our opinion, mine firmly, yours equally firmly, that this is one of those penultimate sort of ultimate. It would just had to be published for all the reasons that it had to be published. So we did a bunch of discussion and headhunting for artists, from everybody from John Muth to George Pratt to I think even Scott Hampton we talked to at some point. There was other people that we talked to that would want to come in to take over these, because it was 12 issues. It was 10 or 12 issues.
It was 12 issues. Alan and Bill had done 2.
Yep.
Bill was going to try and finish 3. The relationship had broken down, as he said, between him and Alan. I know I've talked to Bill since, and Bill said, that amongst the other things that he was dealing with personally, getting a script from Alan is literally like a major anxiety attack, because the bloody things were this thick, right? And so you'd get the script and you'd go, oh my God, okay, I'm going to do my best. But, you never feel worthy. And so he had some concerns about how to do the book, and his relationship with Alan had broken down during this time where Bill wasn't really delivering the work, and whatever, right? And so we were going to move on to a new artist. Okay.
So we Bill worked we worked everything out. Bill completed issue 3, and then we found this artist because everybody else, I think, you clearly said, and I know I would have as an artist, that Alan's scripts would be very intimidating. A lot of the artists that we talked to didn't want to take the project on because of the magnitude of it and the importance, but also the I think being scared shitless to try to adapt Alan Moore's scripts to what he was doing. So we did find an artist that was actually an assistant of Bill Sienkiewicz, had trained with him and was quite skilled, and actually had enough of the qualities of Bill Sienkiewicz that he resembled, that we felt, which was most important, is that we could transition this artist, who specifically told us and desperately told us that he wants to go to, he's like starting from doing a mini comic to working with Alan Moore. And so it's like, you're jumping straight into the big leagues. You did a cornflakes commercial. Now you're working with Martin Scorsese. So jumping into the leagues. So he could have that quality. So we felt that it would transition nicely, that we could still keep the aesthetic and the tone and everything for the quality of the series. So in the short version, and then we can elaborate on bits and pieces in a bit. So we bring in Al Columbia, we pay him a very hefty page rate, including I flew with Al to Northampton, England, to meet Alan, to go through. They spent, a lot of time together, sort of tuning in and getting to this thing. And that was on the company. And then we paid him a very, high-end industry standard page rate to do the work. He completed the issue, or heading towards the path to almost completing the issue, had run out of money, and even I think we'd advanced him the last 10 pages or something because it was quite time-consuming.
Well, just quick time on that.
I'd already bought.
Just a quick time on that. No, we hadn't advanced him that money, and there was a reason why we hadn't advanced him that money, because I was trying to help him, right? He wanted to be advanced the money, and I had said to him, "Bud, I'm worried for you. If I advance you this money, you're never gonna catch up. I think you're gonna feel better if you do the work and we pay you the money for it, because at that point you're not going to be behind trying to catch up. You'll actually be level, and that will be better for you. It's going to help you." So we were trying to help him, but we did not pay him the rest of the money to the end of the thing until he handed the work in. So just a clarification, all right?
No, that's good, because I think it was because at that point I think I had bought all the artwork.
Yeah.
So I had bought all the artwork from his other project, Doghead, but I had actually paid him to do. I paid him for all the original artwork for that issue, and so that allowed him to live. I think it took him 2 months longer than he had planned. But you're right, we did not pay him for the rest of the issue, and you were sort of like, once you bring the issue in, finally, that would do that. And so we just kind of noticed that as time went on, and I think the pressure built up, and we didn't know fully understand what was going on within his life, that he started saying a lot of times, like, "Well, you don't want Al Columbia, you want Bill Sienkiewicz." We were sort of like, "Well, yeah, but that's the point. It's like, that's the point. You agreed to come on to do the project because you could carry on the same tonality, what we were all looking for, including Alan, everybody, is that you could carry on and make this series unified all the way through the end of the series. But yeah, it's like, we want Al, but we need you to keep it consistent with the series. And you already drew like that anyway. But it just came to be, he seemed to be getting increasingly more and more intense about this sort of aesthetic. And then I think I'll divert to you for the last part of it, where he had completed the issue.
Yeah. So I want to interject something first, right? So what happened was that as we had this young guy in, I think we could begin to see that he had some issues, right? And I'm not being like rude or anything. I'm just saying that it was clear that this young guy, I think he was 19 or 20, but we could tell that he had a few issues evolving. And the when we got our first view of this was on his book, Doghead. He had a sketchbook. We did it. And as usual, we were very kind, and we wanted to make the book to be something that he loved. We always did that with Tundra. We always made the book be something that the creators absolutely adored themselves. And so we arranged for Al to go on a press check. That means that he was going to go and look at the printing as it came out of the press, and we would look at the inks and the way that they bled onto the paper. And then Al would say, "Oh, well, I need the color to move here and I need the color to move there," so that this guy, this young artist, could literally go to the printer and make sure that it printed exactly the way that he wanted. Now, that's really kind, and it's also really giving of the publisher to nurture their creators in that way. We sent him over with Michael. Michael took him to the press check. And that afternoon, and this is before he's done, Michael comes home, and Michael Eastman, his brain is on fire, and he's trembling. And he walks in my office and said, "Paul, I need to talk to you." What happened, Michael? Well, it turns out that when the press had started printing and the inks had come off, Al didn't like the way that they looked and suddenly started screaming inside this thing. Now, this is the anecdotal thing that Michael had come to me with. I didn't see it myself, but he basically said that Al Columbia had started screaming at him and screaming at the printer, and had basically had a hysteria fit. Had been, obviously, there was something that was a problem. This was okay, wait a minute, maybe this guy has a few issues and we didn't know about this, right? But I'm telling you, Michael came in frazzled and said, I've never seen anything like it. Like, I don't know what just happened to me, but Al Columbia just flipped out at the printer and started screaming at me and screaming at the printer. And we are all trying to say to him, Al, this is why you are here. You're here to make sure that the inks are correctly printed. This is all about you, buddy. We're doing you the thing that you're screaming about, and you're still screaming at us. Don't scream. Just tell us what you need us to do to fix the book. So let's be clear. That's incredibly weird. That's incredibly crazy behavior. That's like, hang on a minute, not being disingenuous, not being trying to be rude. We think the guy has some health issues, some mental health issues, and it's not because we're like saying he's crazy. I think the guy might have had some problems. And so we said, listen, and I took Al in my office, and for 2 hours, I calmed him down because he was irate. And I told him, bud, the whole point here. But when someone's made a mistake, they're not going to climb off it, right? And so Al didn't want to say, oh, yeah, I realized what you were doing. Al's like, well, you got it wrong, and you told me this. And we were like, okay, and we finally get to the point. So now we know this guy's got issues, right? As you said, we give him big numbers. And now, if you remember, he's working directly above Tundra Publishing. He has an entire office to himself. And it's not just an office, Kevin. It used to be a photographer's studio, remember? The fella that used to do the photography for us, can't remember his name, but he used to photograph all the covers, and he abandoned that studio, left it, and then Al Columbia got that studio up top, and it was beautiful. It had all this wood paneling in it, beautiful light, and he had it to himself. So one of the things that was a benefit was that we could see him drawing this artwork. And here he is drawing big numbers. At the time, Bill's agent was a guy called Harvey. I'm not kidding you. And we couldn't get Bill to deliver 3, and it was giving me a bleeding stomach ulcer. And I would call him Harvey the Invisible Agent, remember? And I would try to chase Harvey to get artwork from Bill, and by hook or by crook, we got all of book 3. And we're like, great. We finished book 3. We've got 1 and 2, and this guy's upstairs, and he's finishing 4. He's behind on his payments. You've paid him for the artwork, but it's not like you didn't see the artwork. We kind of knew it was right there. I mean, you're talking 48 pages that look like this. They look like this, and they're Al Columbia's version of this book, and he's drawing big numbers 4. We finally got this book back on track, right? So here's the crazy part. Here's the part that okay, just to be clear, Rob, I ideally wish Al Columbia had met Alan Moore in person. He did meet Alan Moore in person. We took him over.
I flew him there to meet him, yeah.
We took him over to meet Alan Moore so that he could get in the project.
Yeah.
This guy had some issues, and he had some financial issues, and you had helped him out personally. But eventually he comes down to me in my office and he said, Paul, I finished issue 4, and I'd like you to look at it. And can I get paid? And I went upstairs, and he showed me every single one of those pages, 48, and they were beautiful. 48 finished pages of big numbers 4. And he said, I just have to put fixative on them because they were all charcoal drawings. And he said, I just got to spray them with fixative. And I walked downstairs with him to Susan Alston, who was the person that would write the check. And I said, Susan, Al's finished the work. Al, I'm really happy for you because now you're not behind. You're getting paid for the work that you finished. And I think that it's helped you to get back on track. And she paid him. So now we think we're home free. And the next morning, I come into Tundra, and his housemate was a guy named Mark Arsenault. And he worked with us as an art director. He was an art guy. And Mark Arsenault came into my office, and he was trembling. And he said, Paul, I need to tell you something. I said, what do you need to tell me? And he said, last night, Al Columbia came home and had an episode. And he took all of the artwork for big numbers 4 and destroyed it. And I don't know in my career that I've ever had a moment. I don't know about you, but I've never had a moment in my life or in my career that was like that. I said, basically, bullshit. No way did this guy tear it. He said he tore up the pages. And I said, can you run this by me? So we go through this thing. Like, he went home. He was mad. He was having an episode. He destroyed the entire book. And we're like, what the hell has happened? Now, let me tell you something that I've never gotten, because you see me being frustrated right now. Apart from Al Columbia's kind of bizarre behavior afterwards, where he blamed me and he blamed you and he told everybody how horrible it was and how bad I was and how awful and all the horrible things, you know, it's one of those moments where it's like no act of kindness goes unpunished, Kevin. You paid him for his art. I put an arm around him. I tried to help him. We did everything we could, and he still pulled that bullshit. But the one part that I've never really forgotten is that he may have been Van Gogh crazy. You know, I cut my ear off because I'm a crazy artiste. Yeah? Well, you weren't so crazy that you didn't get paid first, pal. You made sure that I paid you and that you got money for it before you destroyed it. If you were just going to destroy it, go for it. You're an artist. You do your little piece of Van Gogh self-sabotage. But you made sure that you got paid more money before you destroyed it. And that's hard to accept. So now, so now in this, because this was a drain on my life, right? What do I have to do? I have to go try and see if this is true. So I drive into town and I go to look for him. He says, he's even said that I came after him with a baseball bat. I didn't come after him with a baseball bat. I did not. I did not come after him with a baseball bat. It's all of the silliness that Al has said over the years, things that I did, horrible things that I said. I was just trying to be favored by you. You know, I was doing it so I could be, so you would like me. You already liked me. It didn't really matter, right? Like, I didn't need you to like me by, you know, so this was all bullshit. And I've never forgotten that. Go ahead.
No, I was saying, yeah, we just wanted the book to come out. We worked so hard on it.
We just wanted the fucking book to come out. And so all of this disingenuous bullshit where he called me a magician and a wizard and an evil person, and then he called you the same, and he said I was a snake in the grass, and I came with him after a baseball bat. And you know what that does? That very simply tries to distract from the truth, which is you took us for a ride, we paid you, you destroyed the work and disappeared. Right? You're not that crazy. And so I did go searching for him. I knocked him on the house and I went downtown to try and find him. I wasn't happy, right? I wasn't happy. And I was going to confront him. But for the most part, I was just going like, you surely didn't tear this book up, did you, Al? Could you just hand it to me? I literally just went to go get the work, right? I didn't think that he actually had. Lo and behold, he had. He had destroyed the entire book. And even to this day, he has never admitted that he said, no, I didn't do it. Yeah? Well, where the fuck is it then? We paid for it.
Yeah.
And the worst part is the little bit that you always say as your joke, right? Big numbers 4, that you ended up having big numbers 4 in your office, remember? Tell everybody what that was.
Oh, the thing was, it was at this point in the odyssey of the Tale of Big Numbers, I think we, had invested, I think personally, 2+ years, maybe a little bit more in getting this moving down the road and finally going and working, as well as a considerable amount of money. And I just remember that I think, my recollection is that by the time I got to the office and you had to report to me what had gone on, and we were both like, what the fuck, that we actually went up to the office space, and it was Fred Moore. I think it was
Fred Moore. Fred Moore was it? Yeah.
Fred Moore's office space that then Al was working on it, and everything was gone. He cleaned out everything. The artwork was gone. His tools, all his art supplies, and everything were gone. And I just remember looking down at the on the floor, and it was like, it was probably about, the drawing was probably about as big as my thumb, and it was of interestingly enough, because he would use photographic reference for a lot of the characters that he would shoot in the different poses. in this particular case, he chose Mark Arsenault, which was one of the art guys that worked on the Mark Martin or for us, and as one of the models. And so I found this thumb size drawing cutout of Mark Arsenault, and I picked it up, and I just remember like, this is for $20,000 of my investment. This is all I have.
That was Big Numbers 4.
For Big Numbers, it was on Big Numbers 4, and because it was unused, I think, piece. And so I did this book, I think a year or two later, a couple years later, called Infectious, and it was just sort of this really graphic horror story. And I did this, collage style cover, and I had this because I used to put that Big Numbers piece. I had it in my office at Tundra for another couple of years before it all went away. But I remember gluing that onto that cover and go, this cover that I've now produced is worth $20,000 because I've got my whole Big Numbers is glued to this cover now, and that's still
because I was going to say, if you didn't laugh, man, then you cry, because I'm like, how could this have happened? And at that point, it was the end of Big Numbers. That's it. It's done. It's never going to be published. And I can remember having to call Alan. That probably was one of my least favorite days of my life. To go, mate, I told you 2 days ago that the work is finished and that we're moving, and I got some bad news. Can you imagine that phone call? Yeah,
and it was tough because I remember. I think we might have had a chance to sit with him one other time afterwards, because I think we were still working on From Hell with him, and then the Lost Girls project he was doing with Melinda Gebby and stuff. And I think we got a chance to sit with him, but it was one of those things that, again, being the person that he was like, I appreciate what you guys did. You guys really tried, and we went all in for a creator that we loved and adored, and we wanted to see this project happen. And it was just one of those things that you can't make this up. It's like, sometimes, and I try to relate to people my experience I've had in Hollywood. You've had the same thing or different experiences. And it's not a lot of this stuff comes back to like what I'm trying to do with like Flying Blood and things, but it's like when you explain a situation like that, and that's, what do we have to gain by making up any part of that story? Nothing. It was something that we worked our fucking ass off to make this reality happen, make this project happen, to finally get this thing out there because we loved it and believed in it so much. Why would we lie about it? That's what happened. We have nothing to gain. We're not justifying anything. It's like,
yep. And I think if you look at it, Kevin, if you honestly look at it, there were plenty of other people that had things to gain. For example, they didn't want to tell the truth. They didn't want to admit the things that they did. They didn't want to admit they tried to rip off Tundra. They didn't want to admit that they were weak. They didn't want to admit that they were greedy. They didn't want to admit that they destroyed Big Numbers 4. So instead of having this admission and having any kind of humility, they pointed the finger at me, and they pointed the finger at you, and they pointed the finger at Mark. They pointed the finger back at Tundra. In other words, instead of going on the defense, let's go on the attack first. And that is equally reprehensible, right? You didn't just take Kevin Eastman and his money for a ride and all of these good people that tried to put your work together. The moment that you did it, you knew what you had done, and you began to lie about what you had done. And so to lose Big Numbers in that fashion was bad enough. I've been completely silent about this in the 28 years or so since, with the exception of one interview that I began to do. And I asked the comic reporter, please cite my sources, go check it. And that reporter didn't do it. I don't care what anyone says about Big Numbers. And I know that you don't either, because the truth is we were both there. We saw it happen. We know exactly what happened. We know every single thing that happened. It happened right in front of me, you, Mark Martin, and the people at Tundra. It happened in front of Mark Arsenault. We watched it happen. And so who cares what the story from the crazy person is? And it's not like I wouldn't forgive Al. I understand, man, if you had issues. I don't mind. Sorry, I know it's not my money, right? I would forgive you. I would forgive you for chopping up the book. but I'm not going to forgive you for lying because you were dishonest about what happened. You didn't say it got the better of me, or I wish I hadn't made that mistake. Instead, you went on the attack. He attacked me, and he attacked you, and he attacked people that we care about and said, you people did it. You people did it. We didn't do anything except pay you a lot of money to do a book that you fucked up. So it's you know,
yeah, and I agree, and it's that, but it's, you know, I look at many years ago, it's like Frank Rossetto was one of the first guys that actually would say to book publishers that were commissioning him to do artwork, he said that I'll take less money for my painting, for what you would normally pay for a painting, to get the original artwork back.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, this is a story that he told me himself, you know, whether it was made more elaborate or more interesting over the years, but he just said, you know, he was out, he's like, you know, and he's got this great, you know, New York accent. He said, I would tell him I'd take less money, but I want my artwork back. And they would berate him for being egotistical and, oh, you're an artist, right? And this is at a time where all these people, the publishers they worked for, would keep the original artwork as well as all rights to everything. And this then coincides with a story that Jack Kirby had told in a couple of interviews, and it was the building that they worked with in New York City. When it rained, the water would come into the lobby, and so they would send an intern down into the vaults, and they would tell them to go get a bunch of the stacks and stacks of original artwork, and they would get some artwork to sort of lay on the floor to absorb the water that was leaking into the lobby. And Kirby tells a story where he came in and there were like Hal Foster originals and some other fantastic originals that people were walking in out of the rain, wiping their feet on. And he was just horrified and mortified because he was also, you know, it was a work for hire business at that time. And he picked up a lot of the pages and sort of, you know, stuffed them behind a desk to preserve them. And to me, so it's like, the original art, the art is the process, the beauty of, you know, why we go to museums, why I founded the Words and History Museum, and what I wanted to do with that, to show the original artwork for the form that I've loved my entire life. So when I think like how that relates to a project like Big Numbers, is that everything that was created for that issue 4, and I'd seen a lot of the pages, you'd seen the pages, and it was exquisite, it was beautiful, it was all that we hoped for, and all that we wanted to see as this project for our hero, Alan Moore, to see it continue and be brought to life. And that was taken away, that was destroyed. And so that nobody ever gets to see that. And that's sort of the thing that, yes, losing the money sucked, the lying sucked, every part of that, the whole story, the struggle to make that happen sucked. And on top of that, nobody got to see the work. Nobody, you know, even if it was, you know, it was just one of those things that, you know, we talked about like Swamp V8, and we talked about just other, you know, great iconic projects that just never get to see the light of day. So that to me is a real tragedy in that story. And
it's one of the biggest tragedies of it, I think, and I'm very, very sad that that's the case. But that being said, as my buddy Stogie says, Al talked a ton of shit, and he took no responsibility for it. He really didn't. Like Rob says, had Al given you the pages and begged out after number 4, who would we have tapped to finish it? I'm not sure we could have done. Yeah. Right? But we understand. I can forgive Al always for any mental health issue that he had. I can give it. I never had any animosity towards him with that. Here's one thing. People know the difference between lying and the truth. And so many of the lies that have been told about Tundra, so many of the things that were never true, and we've had to sit there and watch those lies and never really have anything to say. And in the end, I want to bring you all the way back around before we kind of sign off. You and I have known each other for obviously now 32 years. Crazy. And we've been through big stuff, small stuff. That was a seminal moment in our lives. But I told you that there were 2 things that you said to me, and I'm going to carry them with me for the rest of my life. And this, I think, is the saddest part of this. We're not going to end on the downer. We're going to talk about what we're going to do next. But you told me once this was an itch that you couldn't. No, you said it was our itch that we couldn't scratch. You and I both had this itch we could never scratch, and it was Tundra Publishing, because we'd never been able to solve it. We could never go back in time and get Al's artwork. And I wish I've always felt such guilt, right? Because I looked at that artwork and I said, oh yeah, you can put fixative on it. And what I should have done was just pick it up and run away with it, right? And I felt like I cost you money, and you would never blame me for it, but I feel bad, and so there's all these things that are so difficult to accept. After Tundra, you and I would work together and we would be friends, and I'd be in LA or something, and I remember that you and I went one time, and this was right at the end of Tundra, and we sat in a pub on it was called the Snake Pit, whatever road that's on. It's on what road's it on?
Melrose Avenue.
Melrose. So you and I had met up. I was in town. We figured we'd go for a drink, and I sat with you. And I might get through this. I sat with you, and you're my great friend, right? And I know what you did for these people. I know what you tried to do for these people, right? I know that you did this for the benefit of the creative community, and I know that you cared. And you sat there, and you had tears in your eyes, and you said, the saddest part of this, Paul? I did this for the benefit of the creative community, and most of them didn't deserve it.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it, because it was the moment that your heart broke. And I thought, these fucking people, what they did was they took, not all of them, obviously great people, but these people, they took advantage of you, and they just took advantage of kindness. And as they say, no act of kindness goes unpunished. And watching your heartbreak in front of me as you tried to explain to me how you felt was awful. So I'll never forget those two things. It's an itch we can't scratch. And the problem with the creative, I did this for the benefit of the creators. And the problem is most of them don't deserve it. I know you don't really feel that, but you did then, because they had broken your heart. And I'm forgiving them for it.
No, that's, it's good. It's sort of having, it's like having a bad breakup, and that, and we've all been there, and life is full of lessons, and we always wish that those lessons always weren't so painful, but I guess that's how we learn and try not to repeat. But the thing is, it's like when you're at the very end of a bad breakup, then you're hurt and you're frustrated and you're lashing out. You haven't processed it all yet, and definitely I felt like it was much like the things that I try to do with words and pictures, and the things I try to do with Tundra, or some of those things, and they just weren't. They didn't pan out the way that I hoped that they would, and I always saw the positive, and you put that forward, and you want to believe in the best, and you want to believe in people, and sometimes you need to be reminded that the world isn't filled with the same kind of people. So the processing part is dealing with it, getting past it, and then not letting it make you bitter or rob you from that belief. Because there's still been, the demise of heavy metal, or my relationship with my ex-partner in heavy metal, who was, who did pull an amazing Bernie Madoff on me,
Yeah.
to that you sort of go through, and you go, you still got to keep that hope alive. You have to keep that positivity out there, and still believe in the basic goodness. I mean, even when you get a little harder towards it, you get a little bit more jaded, but you might be a little bit more guarded, but you still have to keep that openness. And and I do look back, and it's been, whether it be the interview in 1995 to this second of two-part discussion on the subject we've done, it's sort of it just reminds me that that the intentions are good, the intentions are pure, and it's just things just don't, like anything in life, things just don't always work out like you want, but you can't let that take away your heart and soul. You process it, you read it, you deal with it, you process it, and then you put it into a book later on, and put a
yeah.
But yeah, it was
there's a saying, right? No act of kindness unpunished. I've learned a thing that I even learned from this experience, right? Just because what's the best way of putting it? You know, just because I got divorced doesn't mean to say I can't date again, right? Like, I'm always going to trust people. Those who don't trust people can't be trusted, right? You can't trust someone that doesn't trust people. So I'm still going to trust people. I'm much more guarded. I understand things. It's always had an effect on me. But it's not like it dominates my life. It's just when I look back at that moment, I was disappointed by human nature for a little while, because I realized how self-serving people were, how scared they were, how fearful they were. And you kept thinking, man, how could you be fearful in all of this? You're making art. You're doing a great thing. We've got some money to pay you with. We're giving you approval. Everything you could possibly want as a creator. Because nothing right now exists like Tundra Publishing except one thing, and that's self-publishing.
Yeah,
like we can do it all ourselves. We've got Kickstarter, and we're going to do it. We love Kickstarter. That is brilliant, but it's us. I can trust me. I can trust a few close friends. I can trust the people in my company. But man, it's hard to trust publishers. Even since that time, I've worked with publishers. They've stolen material. I've worked with publishers that haven't paid their bills. I've worked with publishers that have let me down. You work with any number of people. And there's a saying by Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher that I use a lot: hell is other people. It's true. Hell is other people, man. Doesn't mean to say I'm not going to trust people, but we just remember, right? So on a lighter note, or a better note, you have some, you've done Drawing Blood, right? You have some Kickstarter. Let's end on a good note, right? What do you have coming for Kickstarter? What's your stuff? What have we got?
Well, it's right now it's we're looking at a couple of different options for Kickstarter, and it's sort of my reservation for any hesitation I'm showing right now is that we did an amazing Kickstarter for successful Kickstarter for Drawing Blood in 2017, which allowed us to do the first 4 issues plus Ragdolls. And then we did another one in 2019, which is the next issues 5 through 8, plus a 2-part series on the Ragdolls that we did with Troy Little. And so we were going to do another Kickstarter, but as we had actually originally planned to launch it in March of this year for a project that I originally created with Simon Bisley called Lost, L-O-S-T, Los Angeles. It's kind of
Los Angeles, yeah.
Post-apocalyptic. It's our love poem to George
Romero,
John Carpenter, and all, Escape from New York and all. But as we drifted into the situation that the world's in now, we just felt like we worried for so many of our fans and supporters that we're just having trouble making ends meet. So we didn't really want to do anything to do Kickstarter or do anything. So even now we've looked at, we want to do one, but at the same time we don't want to abuse the love that we get from our supporters to try to have them put an extra $10 out to support a Kickstarter project that would.
Yeah, we kind of understand that. I think the one thing is, though, that there's also a benefit to giving great work. Listen, people want stuff to make them feel happy, right? Here, I'll show you know about this project, but I'll show everybody what we've got coming up. So this is Fairy Quest, which is something that we have been working on for a long time, and it's originally myself and Humberto Ramos. We did this book. Everybody adores this book. It's a story of Red Riding Hood and the Wolf, and it's a story about like friendship in the face of fascism, right? But for a little kid, it's like, oh, Red Riding Hood and the Wolf are best friends. It's beautiful. It's kind of exquisite. We've done 2 Kickstarters, and we've shown this book around the world. We have fans everywhere, and I had another one of those moments in publishing where it's like we got let down really badly by a publishing partner who didn't deliver the materials. But even so, I wanted to bring the book back. So people have been clamoring for the 3rd issue of this book for a long time. And as you can see, it's really, really beautiful. So we, in 2 weeks' time, are coming out with the very new book. We're coming out with Fairy Quest 3, and we're re-releasing 1 and 2. So on Kickstarter, look out for Fairy Quest 2, Fairy Quest 3, I should say, and the re-release of 1 and 2. So we're just going to bring it out. Because I'm telling you one thing, Kev, as much as it may be a bit of a concern about bringing it to people, remember, we entertain people. And when people complain and they say, why is money being put into the arts? The answer is, what the fuck have you been doing for the last 6 months? You've literally been doing Netflix and chill. Like, what we do is what you need. Like, our creations, you know, like Fairy Quest, all of your work, the Ninja Turtles, all of these things are things that we give to people, and they're a piece of us, right? So one of those, yeah, this is great. Rob got me. When we do Fairy Quest 4, because there are 4 books, we're doing 3 right now. So when I get to number 4, when the artwork is finished, I'm going to make sure I get it in my hands. Yeah.
Yeah, we did sort of like because you know we do a lot of we try to put as much free stuff on the site as Kevin Eastman Studios. You know, we've done these amazingly fun, you know, personally and for the fans, we've done these great. Watch TMNT with me. We're going to do another one with Kevin Monroe on the 2007 Turtle movie. We do stuff. Cool. We still to keep in touch with the fans, so we are going to do another Kickstarter. And we love, you know, it's like, look, we love the love and we want to give it back, so we're putting up, like I said, a lot of free stuff. So, but yeah, this book needs to be out there and completed, and we will be moving forward for our Los Angeles Kickstarter program in the next 2 months. But you're launching this in 2 weeks, you said?
Yeah, we're launching it in a couple of weeks. It's either going to be the 2nd of July, but it's much more likely to be the second week in July. We got a new artist called Mike Bowden that's working on the materials, and I may as well, just for the sake of it, see if I can bring just a couple. Here you go. Just so that people can see it, we'll quickly show you what the new art looks like, because it basically, this guy's incredible. And then Umberto's doing the covers, but this is the new pages, and so he's doing it perfectly. He's doing it perfectly. We got the same colorist, Leo Olia. The characters are great, and this series takes us down through the Looking Glass, and then so the world's going to be amazing. But look at the Tin Man. And look at Dorothy, right? She's like a lieutenant for the witches. It's brilliant. Yeah, it's really. Sam?
So we're going to see this as an animated movie.
Yes. Well, we're working on those kind of things. Obviously, with METAStudios, my company, we're working on those types of things. But Stogie's asking me to say this. All right. So on our website, we're going to be moving into some of the stuff that you do. We're not really, because what we'll do is we'll show you a project we got called Scare City. We're going to do a limited sale of that. We'll do some stuff. But a lot of what you see in Fairy Quest is the kind of material that we make right now. So we've got lots of that. And in a couple of weeks, our site will go up a little bit and change a little bit, so that we can't really do what you do, because I can't do Ninja Turtles, right? But what we'll do is we'll show some of those books like Fairy Quest and Fiction Squad, Scare City, and people will be able to get them from us. But most importantly, what I really care about is Kickstarter, because Kickstarter is everything. And I've had a couple of disappointments on Kickstarter, both for the people that fulfilled my Kickstarter work. They did the fulfillment and they let us down. They didn't send all the stuff properly, and we were just heartbroken, right? We're never going to let anyone touch our stuff again. It's going to be me and my buddy Stogie here, who you see right there. There's Stogie. Me and Stogie and our people at Meta, we're going to send it out. Like, if we have to lick every envelope ourselves, that's exactly what we're going to do, because I'm never letting anyone touch my work again, ever. And that's why I said I think Tundra was the last time in this business when we had people that cared as much about your work as you do, and it still went funky. So in the end, we are going to make our own book, and Kickstarter's it, right? Let's go and do Kickstarter. And I expect to see you on Kickstarter frequently, man. I want to see it, you know? Let's go make our own stuff.
Thank you. No, yeah, because that is the way, it's the way of the future. It is, like, as I said, when we did the first Kickstarter, succeeded, we went back to, you know, David and Ben and I and Troy Little and working on that thing. It's like, I said, that took me, you know, mindset wise, right back to, you know, Peter and I in the beginning. There were no editors, there were anything. We just we did it all ourselves. But luckily, like, you know, you just explaining about the fulfillment part is, like, we still, you know, part of our entire infrastructure is Kevin and Fiona Russell.
Yeah.
Kevin still, you know, he owns his own company called Right Angle Media, and they do that stuff. But Fiona's our COO of Kevin Eastman Studios. But this relationship we have. It's like we have, Courtney and I on this. We're the entire West Coast office. Kevin and Fiona are the entire West Coast office, and they lick. And we've got some help, but it's like, yeah, they package, and Fiona runs that stuff down to the post office, and we do pick up. So, but it is like, so it's real grassroots, and it's sort of a. The great part about it is that it has that sense of accomplishment because you do work hard, and we're independently employed, and we make a business and we make a living together. But you're doing it together, a brick at a time. So there's no, you're not referring it to another apartment. You're not doing this. It's like you're doing a physical work. That's so rewarding. And so, but yeah, we Kickstarter.
Awesome. And the last thing I guess we can say is, even despite all this difficulty, I know people are probably a bit like, oh, I'm going to like do myself in at this point. Hey, guess what? You've known Kevin and Fiona for about 30 years, maybe plus, right? Like 30 years. And they're the good people. Like, I love Kevin and Fiona. Fiona is sweetheart. And you've got these really good people that have stayed in your life.
Yeah, it's
also me, unfortunately, but you're gonna have to keep dealing with that. The best
part, if you can count on one hand, friends that you can count on. It's like, look, I was at your wedding, you came and sang at my wedding.
That's right.
You have your relationships. That's it's like.
I just worked out what I want to say. This is a great way to end this. Sure. Okay. We love this. Thank you so much, everyone, for being part of what we did. We've enjoyed talking this. Maybe one day we'll catch up again at some point. But I want to tell a story about Kevin. Ready? He came to my wedding. I sang at his wedding. Like when he and Courtney got married, I learned a piece of music and I played it on the guitar. I sung it. The sound went off in my ear. I couldn't tell it. I kept playing it. They turned the rest of the music on and it was perfectly timed because that was Providence. We knew that it was going to happen, and it happened. You came to my wedding, and this is what Kevin did at my wedding, right? We went to the rehearsal dinner with our friends and my beautiful wife, Melinda, and all of our friends. And at the end of the night, when we went to pay, Kevin Eastman had paid for my dinner.
I thought you were going to tell a story about the
bandana? Yeah, that's funny too, but yeah. Kevin tried to wear a bandana at my wedding, and my soon-to-be mother-in-law was like, "He's not wearing that bandana."
I had that at the time. Right. It was a day of the wedding, so I had a black bandana that would match the tux, and your mom was like, "No, he's not wearing that." I was like, "Oh yeah, no problem."
Mum goes, "What's the question, Stuggy?" Here you go. So it's a great way, right? It's a great way to end, which is we need the arts. In this fractured time, we need our friends. We need each other. We need things like Kickstarter. We need friendships that endure. And it doesn't matter all those difficult times that we had. Those were things that, they didn't kill us and made us stronger. But as much as that bullshit goes away, friendship endures, man. And it's been my pleasure to be on this with you. And this has been great. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.